The salt air was sharp in my lungs as I stepped out of the title office, the weight of the beach house keys pressing into my palm like proof that I had finally broken free. I was 31 years old, a paralegal who had saved for nearly a decade, juggling late nights with tax forms depositions and endless clerical drudgery, all to reach this singular moment. The sand-streaked wind tugged at my hair, and I smiled at the white stucco house at the end of the lane, its balcony facing the rolling waves of Florida's Gulf Coast. This was supposed to be the chapter where I claimed something that was truly, irrevocably mine. Then my phone vibrated, slicing through the sound of the surf. My brother's name lit the screen. Victor. 36 years old, smug since birth, and the constant shadow over my every accomplishment. Against my better judgment, I answered. His voice came through casual, entitled, heavy with the arrogance I had endured my whole life. "Monica," he said without preamble, "I'm bringing my wife's entire family." My grip tightened around the phone until my knuckles whitened. I blinked at the keys in my hand, still cold from the title agent's desk, the ink on the deed barely dry, and for a moment I thought I had misheard him. What I managed, but he steamrolled forward as if my protest was irrelevant. Isabella's family. He clarified as though it were the most natural thing in the world. All of them. 26 people. They'll love the beach. We'll make it a family place. The word family struck like a slap. My chest contracted. I stared at the ocean, its calm surface mocking the storm inside me. "Victor," I said carefully, "this house is mine. I just closed on it today. It isn't some free resort." He laughed a low, dismissive chuckle. "Don't be dramatic, little sister. You don't even need all that space. Think of it as doing something for us for the family. Dad always said property should be shared, and you don't want to look selfish, do you?" The sound of gulls overhead blurred into the rush of blood in my ears. My legs felt weak, as if the concrete beneath me was shifting. I had envisioned this day so many times, walking into my own front door, opening the windows to let in the sea breeze, standing on the balcony with a glass of wine in hand, finally safe from the years of being overlooked, undervalued, treated as less. Instead, I was standing frozen on the curb, listening to the same voice that had stolen birthdays, savings, and respect, now announcing his intent to colonize the one sanctuary I had carved for myself. My voice cracked when I whispered, "You can't just decide that." Victor exhaled, bored, impatient, already certain of his dominance. "I already told them we'd come. They're excited. They're packing. We'll be down this weekend." "Don't make this difficult, Monica. You know how Mom and Dad feel about family obligations. You don't want to disappoint them again." Again. That single word sliced through me, reopening old wounds that had never really healed. Memories surged every time I had been told to sacrifice, every time Victor had been praised while I was invisible, every time Dolores and Hector reminded me that as a daughter, my place was secondary, temporary, disposable. I swallowed hard, staring at the horizon where the sun was sinking and bleeding orange across the waves. This house was supposed to be my sunrise, not another battlefield. My hand shook as I lowered the phone. He was still talking, still dictating my life as if I were nothing more than a footnote in his story, but my mind had already split from his words. The keys bit into my skin, sharp, insistent, whispering a single truth. If I surrendered this house, if I surrendered this moment, I would never get it back. My heart pounded in my ears louder than the surf, louder than Victor's entitled voice. The air tasted of salt and iron, and I realized I was trembling, not with fear, but with something fiercer rage, resolve, the kind of clarity that comes only when every bridge behind you has already burned. "Victor," I said finally, my voice steady though my chest shook, "this isn't your house, and it never will be." The line went silent. For the first time in years, he had no quick retort. In that silence, I felt the ground solidify beneath me. For the first time, I wasn't backing down. This beach house wasn't just property. It was my proof of survival, my declaration of worth, and I wasn't about to let it be stolen. I wish I could say that phone call was the first time Victor tried to bulldoze my boundaries, but the truth is, it was just another chapter in a lifetime of erasure. From the day I was old enough to notice my parents, Hector and Dolores, built their entire household orbit around my brother. He was the chosen one, the heir, the golden child, whose smallest achievements were magnified into legend, while mine were brushed aside as though they were chores done by obligation. I was 10 when I understood the hierarchy in our home. Victor had just turned 15, and Hector surprised him with a used Jeep Cherokee. It was nothing fancy, but in our small town it was a symbol of status, a declaration that Victor was stepping into manhood with wheels and freedom. I remember standing on the porch in my hand-me-down sneakers watching as my father proudly handed him the keys. Dolores clapped and laughed, hugging her son as though he had cured cancer. And me, I was told I'd be fine taking the school bus until I was married off someday. I hadn't even hit middle school, and already my future was being reduced to someday someone else's problem. That was the rhythm of my life, Victor's every whim catered to my own needs dismissed. When I earned a scholarship my senior year, full tuition to a state university, I thought maybe finally someone would look at me with pride. Instead, Victor came home with some half-baked idea for a startup, and Hector announced at dinner that it makes sense for family to support family. My scholarship savings money I had scraped together from waitressing and tutoring was borrowed to help Victor launch his business. He burned through it in 6 months. The business folded, and I was left scrambling, working 3 jobs to cover textbooks and rent, pretending I wasn't drowning. I asked once if he planned to pay me back. He laughed. "You're family. You don't keep score." But he always kept score when it came to me tallying every slight, every perceived disrespect, making sure our parents heard about each one. Dolores reinforced it with her words, subtle but cutting. When Victor scored a single goal at a high school soccer game, she organized a barbecue. When I made the honor roll 3 years in a row, she barely looked up from her magazine. "Grades are nice, but beauty fades, and you'll be married soon," she'd murmur as though my academic victories were simply practice for someone else's future. I cannot remember a single moment where either of them said they were proud of me without attaching a caveat or a comparison to Victor. Even the nights when I staggered home from closing shifts at the diner, legs aching, tips crumpled in my pocket, I overheard Hector telling relatives, "She just likes to stay busy. Victor's the one with ambition." I carried those slights into adulthood like invisible weights. At 22, when I landed an entry-level position at a law office, I worked so hard that my boss pulled me aside after 6 months and said he saw potential in me, that I had the makings of a paralegal who could climb higher. I went home that night, glowing, eager to share the news. Hector barely nodded. Dolores asked me why I wasn't dating anyone seriously yet. "Careers are fine, Monica, but don't forget your real duty is to marry well. Victor will carry on the family name. You should focus on being supportive." Supportive. That word was a leash looped tight around my neck since childhood. The sacrifices stacked up. When I was 24, Dolores needed minor surgery. Insurance covered most of it, but there were copays and extra treatments. I paid the bills without hesitation, even when it meant skipping meals. No one thanked me. They only complained when I couldn't also help cover Victor's latest credit card debt. At 26, I got pneumonia so badly I had to be hospitalized. I dragged myself back to work too soon because someone had to keep money flowing. Victor, meanwhile, posted vacation photos from Cancun with Isabella, his then girlfriend, now wife. He captioned them, "Living the good life while I was coughing up blood in a hospital bed." Not once did he visit. Not once did Hector or Dolores check if I had enough groceries in my apartment afterward. They assumed I'd bounce back because I always did. What cut deepest wasn't just the favoritism. It was the unspoken rule that my labor, my money, my time existed to serve others, while Victor's existence alone was enough to earn celebration. Hector would beam and say, "That's my boy," when Victor managed the bare minimum, passing a class, landing a part-time job he'd quit within weeks. Meanwhile, I earned certifications, promotions raises, and each time the response was muted, almost annoyed, as though my accomplishments were inconvenient. Dolores once said to me, "Don't flaunt yourself, Monica. It makes Victor feel small." Imagine being told to dim your own light to protect the ego of someone who never lifted a finger to help you. The most humiliating betrayal came 2 years ago when I discovered Victor had forged my signature on a family trust document. He siphoned money into his account funds meant for both of us. When I confronted Hector and Dolores expecting outrage, they waved me off. Victor just needed it more. You'll manage. You always do. That phrase, you'll manage, was their anthem. I was their workhorse, their silent safety net. And if I dared protest, I was labeled selfish, dramatic, ungrateful. It's hard to explain what it does to a person to be invisible in their own family. To pour out years of effort and receive nothing but contempt while watching your siblings stumble and still be worshipped. There's a grief in that, a hollowing. And yet, I kept hoping. Each holiday, I'd convince myself maybe this year they'd notice me. Maybe this year they'd say thank you. But the hope always curdled into disappointment. On my 28th birthday, I waited for a call. It never came. Hector and Dolores were busy planning Victor's anniversary party. That was the night I realized the pattern wasn't going to change. If I wanted freedom, I'd have to carve it out myself. That's why the beach house mattered so much. It wasn't just a piece of property. It was the physical manifestation of every late night I worked, every sacrifice I made, every humiliation I endured without collapsing. It was proof that I wasn't disposable, that I could build something no one could take away. Except now, Victor was trying again with the same entitled confidence that he had used to strip me of dignity for 3 decades. So when he said, "I'm bringing my wife's entire family," it wasn't just a request. It was the old pattern replaying in real time, the assumption that my life, my space, my sweat equity belonged to him, and Hector and Dolores would back him just as they always had. The words still echoed in my skull, blending with decades of memory. Dolores insisting I cook dinner while Victor lounged in front of the TV. Hector handing Victor the last piece of cake while telling me girls shouldn't eat so much. Victor sneering that my degree was useless because eventually I'd end up as someone's wife. And me swallowing each insult because fighting back always ended with me alone accused of breaking family harmony. Standing with the keys in my hand, the ocean at my back, I realized something different was happening this time. The weight of history was real, but so was the weight of the brass key digging into my skin. This house wasn't just shelter. It was a line in the sand, and I was done letting Victor and my parents drag me back into the old pattern. For the first time, I felt the stirrings of resolve, the whisper of a future where I wouldn't have to beg for respect. The past had written me into the role of silent supporter, but maybe, just maybe, the future could be mine to author. The day after Victor's phone call, I woke with the uneasy feeling that the world had already shifted against me. The gulls outside shrieked like messengers of doom as I stood in the kitchen of my small apartment staring at the purchase documents spread across the table. The ink was still crisp, the signatures official, the deed in my name alone. And yet, a single entitled phone call had transformed my triumph into dread. I kept replaying his words in my mind. I'm bringing my wife's entire family. 26 strangers invading a house that represented the culmination of a decade of work. By mid-morning, the next blow landed. My phone lit up with my father's name. For a moment, I thought perhaps impossibly he was calling to congratulate me. I answered tentative hope, trembling in my chest. Monica Hector said, his voice stern and clipped. "I spoke to your brother. He told me you're making a fuss about the beach house." I gripped the phone pulse, quickening. "Dad, it's not a fuss. I bought that house. It's mine. Victor can't just invite 26 people without asking." Hector sighed, a sound of irritation, as though I were an insolent child. "You're being selfish again. Victor is your brother. He has a wife and responsibilities. You're single Monica. You can afford to share. Family property is family property." My stomach nodded. "It isn't family property," I said, my voice rising. "It's mine. I worked for it. I paid for it." But he wasn't listening. "Don't embarrass us. Dolores and I agree you should let them stay. It's only right." Then the line went dead, leaving me trembling anger and hurt mixing like acid in my veins. Within the hour, Dolores called. Her tone was softer, but the words cut deeper. "Sweetheart, don't make trouble. You know how Victor gets. You don't want to be the cause of family tension, do you? Be a good sister. prove you're generous. Women should keep peace, not stir conflict. The gendered sting of it burned. All my life, she had reduced me to roles caretaker, peacemaker, background character. Now she wanted me to surrender the one thing I had built alone. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the apartment sounded like a warning, every shadow a reminder of what was at stake. I saw the beach house in my mind, its pale walls and wide balcony already crawling with Victor's laughter, Isabella's shrill commands, and the endless chatter of relatives who didn't even know my name. I imagined them spilling drinks on the hardwood, cramming into the bedrooms, taking selfies on the balcony as if they owned it. I pictured Dolores scolding me for protesting, Hector praising Victor for bringing everyone together. The thought twisted my stomach until I ran to the bathroom and vomited. The next morning, I drove back to the beach house, parking in the driveway, just to reassure myself it was real, still mine. The ocean air was sharp, the sound of waves steady. I walked through each room, running my hands along the doorframes, whispering to myself, "This is mine. They can't take this." Yet fear gnawed at me. Because history had taught me otherwise, every boundary I had tried to set, they had broken. And every time I had been too exhausted, too alone to enforce it. On the third day, the situation escalated again. Isabella herself called. Her voice was syrupy at first. "Monica, hi, we're so excited about the house. It's going to be perfect for my family. They've already booked time off work. The kids can't wait to use the beach. You'll see it'll be fun." My jaw clenched. "Isabella, you don't have permission. This isn't a hotel. It's my home." Her tone hardened. "You don't want to start drama, do you? Everyone's expecting it. Victor said you'd be supportive. Don't ruin this for us." I hung up my hands, shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. By that evening, messages began pouring in from unknown numbers. Isabella's cousins, her uncles, her nieces, people I had never met, texted variations of the same theme. "Thanks for letting us stay. Can't wait for the beach. We'll bring food for the grill." The entitlement was suffocating. They had already claimed my sanctuary in their minds, and Victor had fueled their confidence by presenting it as a done deal. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the barrage of messages, and something inside me snapped. For years, I had told myself maybe next time they'd respect me, maybe next time they'd treat me as an equal. But here it was again, the same story, my labor, my money, my time, all assumed to belong to Victor, validated by Hector and Dolores, reinforced by Isabella's arrogance. The cycle was unbroken, and if I surrendered now, it never would be. That realization came with a memory sharp and unwelcome. I was 25, working a double shift at the diner, my feet blistered. I came home to find Hector and Victor in my apartment, helping themselves to the lasagna I had prepped for the week. Victor smirked. "You weren't using it." When I protested, Hector barked, "Stop being selfish. You live alone. He's your brother." I had swallowed the anger back then because fighting would have meant nothing but more shouting, more blame. But I wasn't 25 anymore. I wasn't the girl who swallowed everything. The next morning, I drove to the beach house again. This time, I didn't wander aimlessly. I walked each room with purpose, taking photographs, documenting every corner. Proof. If they trespassed, if they damaged anything, I would have records. I pulled out a notebook and began a list: attorney, property manager, rental contract, sheriff. For once, I felt the faint pulse of control. Still, the dread didn't vanish. Each day, the imagined invasion grew louder in my head. 26 people, cars in the driveway, voices echoing through the hallways. Victor sitting on the couch smug, claiming it was all his by right. Hector and Dolores beaming at him, ignoring me. Isabella boasting on social media about her family's vacation home. It was a nightmare playing on repeat. The confrontation became inevitable when Hector and Dolores arrived unannounced at my apartment one evening. Dolores carried a casserole as if this were a casual visit, but the tension in her eyes betrayed her intent. Hector wasted no time. "Victor says you're being difficult. We're here to talk sense into you." I stood in the doorway, blocking them from coming inside. "Dad, Mom, I'm not being difficult. I'm enforcing reality. This house is mine. I worked for it. Victor has no right." Hector's jaw tightened. "We raised you better than this. Family comes first. Your brother needs that house more than you. You're single. You don't understand responsibility." My chest burned. Responsibility I've been carrying responsibility my entire life. Paying your medical bills, covering Victor's debts, working myself into exhaustion. Don't tell me I don't understand. Dolores sighed as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. Monica, please, don't make us choose sides. The words stabbed deeper than she knew. They had always chosen sides, always his, never mine. When they left casserole untouched, I sat on the couch shaking. My own parents had come to pressure me not to congratulate me. They had crossed from passive enablers to active conspirators. I realized then that Victor wasn't acting alone. He had their blessing, their encouragement. I wasn't just fighting my brother. I was fighting the entire system of my family, the weight of decades of favoritism and gender bias pressing down on me. For the first time, though, I didn't feel small. I felt cornered, yes, but cornered animals fight hardest. The line had been drawn and I could see the battle approaching. 26 people descending my parents on their side, Victor leading them with his smug grin, and me standing in the doorway of the beach house with only my resolve, my paperwork, and the law at my back. The thought terrified me, but it also lit something fierce in my chest. I looked out the window at the night sky, the city lights blurred by my tears. Not this time, I whispered to myself. Not again. The house was more than bricks and mortar. It was my life reclaimed, and I would not surrender it not to Victor, not to Isabella, not even to Hector and Dolores. The escalation was complete. The war for the beach house, for my dignity, for my freedom, had begun. The day after my parents' ambush at my apartment, I sat at the dining table surrounded by documents. The purchase agreement, the deed, the closing statement, stacks of paper that proved what I already knew: the beach house was mine. But I had learned long ago that truth didn't matter in my family. What mattered was who shouted louder, who guilt-tripped harder, who wielded power with no shame. If I wanted to hold on to my sanctuary, I couldn't rely on sentiment. I needed strategy. The first call I made was to Rachel Kim, my colleague and friend from the law office. At 40, Rachel had built a reputation as a sharp property attorney, and more than once I had watched her dismantle arrogant landlords in court with nothing but a calm voice and a stack of receipts. When she picked up, I wasted no time. "Rachel," I said, my voice taut, "I need legal reinforcement. My brother is trying to take over my beach house." There was a pause, then a sharp inhale. "Monica, you just closed on that property. Is he serious?" "He's already invited 26 of his wife's relatives," I said flatly. "My parents are siding with him. They keep saying family property." Rachel let out a dry laugh. "Family property. Last time I checked, your signature is the only one on that deed. That means it's not community property, it's yours, period." The relief in her words was immediate, but Rachel didn't stop there. "Listen carefully. Document everything. Keep copies of every text, every voicemail. If they show up uninvited, that's trespassing. If they damage anything, that's property destruction. And if they try to intimidate you, we can involve the sheriff." Her voice was steady, clinical, like a scalpel cutting through the fog of panic. For the first time since Victor's call, I felt the tremor of control in my veins. "I'll start pulling together the paperwork," I said. Rachel promised to draft a cease and desist letter that could be served if Victor escalated further. Sometimes she added a piece of paper with legal letterhead is enough to shut people down. When I hung up, I exhaled shakily. I wasn't alone. I had an ally who understood the weight of proof, the language of law. The next step was tactical. If Victor and Isabella tried to storm the house, I needed a shield stronger than my word. I called Mr. Thompson, the seasoned property manager who had handled rentals for several attorneys at the firm. At 55, he was professional, no-nonsense, and carried the kind of authority that entitled people tended to respect, clipboard in hand, voice unwavering. "Mr. Thompson, I said I need to lock in a short-term rental agreement for my beach house effective immediately. Can you draft a contract and be available this weekend?" He agreed without hesitation. "I'll bring the paperwork and I'll be on site. If anyone tries to move in without authorization, I'll handle it." The relief was tangible. With Mr. Thompson as a witness and Rachel on standby, I wouldn't be standing in that doorway alone. That evening, I went to the beach house again, but this time it wasn't just to wander aimlessly. I walked through every room with my phone snapping photos of pristine walls, polished floors, untouched furniture. Evidence. If anything changed, I'd have proof. I even filmed a video walkthrough narrating the date and time, documenting every detail. The house felt different under my footsteps, not just a sanctuary, but a fortress I was preparing to defend. Still, fear gnawed at me. History whispered that no matter what I built, they would find a way to strip it from me. That night, I sat on the balcony overlooking the surf journal, open on my lap, pen trembling in my hand. I wrote the words I needed to believe. This is mine, not theirs, not anymore. I have the proof, the allies, the strength. I will not surrender again. As I wrote, I felt the tremor in my chest settle into something firmer resolve. The next morning, I walked into a hardware store and bought new locks. I hired a locksmith to reinforce the doors and install a coded keypad system. I didn't tell my family. Let them find out when their keys didn't work, because yes, somehow Victor had copies of old house keys from my parents, even though the beach house was never theirs. With every step, I felt the balance shifting. For years, I had been reactive, scrambling after each betrayal. Now, I was proactive, setting the board, anticipating moves before they came. 3 days later, Rachel sent me a draft of the cease and desist letter. I read it slowly, savoring each line. It was dry, clinical, filled with legal jargon, but to me, it read like poetry. Any attempt to enter the premises without permission constitutes trespassing. Legal action will be pursued. It ended with my full legal name standing alone in bold. No mention of Victor, no mention of Hector or Dolores. Just me. I printed copies, slipping one into a folder labeled Proof. Meanwhile, Mr. Thompson confirmed a short-term rental for the weekend. A young couple from Atlanta would be arriving Friday. Their names, signatures, and payment details were locked in undeniable proof that the house was in legal use. I felt the net tightening. If Victor arrived with his 26 relatives, he wouldn't be walking into a vacant house he could claim by intimidation. He'd be trespassing into an active rental with witnesses ready to document every step. The final piece of my plan was emotional, but no less vital. I wrote a letter addressed to Hector and Dolores. It wasn't long, just 2 paragraphs, but it was the hardest thing I'd ever written. I am no longer your scapegoat or Victor's safety net. The beach house is mine, purchased with my own money, signed in my name. If you choose to stand with him, you are choosing to stand against me. I will not yield. I will not sacrifice any more. Consider this notice that I am drawing a boundary I will enforce. I sealed the envelope, but didn't send it yet. It sat on the counter, a physical reminder that this time I wasn't playing the silent, obedient daughter. That night, as I walked along the shoreline, the waves crashing at my feet, I felt the old fear rise again. The fear that somehow, despite all my preparation, Victor would still find a way to win, that Hector and Dolores would twist reality, that Isabella would charm her way into validation, that 26 voices chanting family would drown mine out. But then I remembered the weight of the brass keys, the feel of Rachel's steady voice in my ear, the certainty in Mr. Thompson's promise. For the first time in my life, I had leverage that wasn't emotional. It was legal, financial, undeniable. I stopped at the edge of the surf, let the salt spray sting my face, and whispered into the night, "Not this time." I knew what was coming. The weekend was approaching, the date Victor had promised his army of in-laws. I could almost hear the rumble of their vans on the highway. But this time the story would not unfold the way it always had. This time I had drawn the line, and I was ready to defend it. Friday afternoon, the sky turned heavy clouds hanging low, as if the earth itself knew what was coming. I stood in the living room of the beach house, the air smelling faintly of fresh paint and salt water. Every surface gleamed because I had spent hours polishing it. My bag of documents sat open on the dining table: deed, closing, statement, rental agreement, cease and desist letter. Rachel's number was on speed dial. Mr. Thompson arrived early, clipboard in hand, calm and solid as a lighthouse. "They'll come loud," he warned, adjusting his glasses, "but the law is quiet and firm. Let them roar. We'll hold the line." The first van pulled into the driveway just after 5. Laughter spilled out before the doors even opened. Then another van, then 2 more. In minutes, the driveway was packed, voices rising, luggage thumping onto the pavement. I counted 26 people, exactly just as Victor had promised. Isabella emerged in a wide-brimmed sun hat, waving her arms like a queen returning to her palace. Behind her, children shrieked with excitement. Teenagers balanced coolers, uncles and aunts carried folding chairs. They were already talking about where to put the grill, where the children would sleep, how beautiful their view would be. Then Victor stepped forward. Smug relaxed as though everything had already been decided. He raised his voice so everyone could hear. "All right, everyone, welcome home. Monica's inside, waiting to let us in." The crowd cheered and the sound pierced me like knives. I pushed the door open and stepped onto the porch, heart pounding. "Stop right there." My voice was sharper than I expected, slicing through the noise. Conversation stalled. A few people glanced at one another, confused. Victor smirked. "Don't be dramatic, little sister. We're tired from the drive. Move aside." "I will not," I said, forcing steel into my spine. "This is my house. You are not invited." Gasps rippled through the group. Isabella stepped forward, her smile tight. "Monica, don't embarrass yourself. Everyone's here. The kids are excited. Be gracious." Before I could answer, Mr. Thompson descended the steps, clipboard raised. "This property is under an active short-term rental contract," he announced. His tone was calm, professional, undeniable. "I am the manager responsible. No unauthorized entry will be permitted." Murmurs erupted. One of Isabella's uncles barked. "What nonsense is this?" another cousin said. "Victor told us this was a family place." Victor's smirk faltered, then hardened. He stepped closer to me, lowering his voice, but loud enough for all to hear. "You're really going to play landlord." "You're single, Monica. You don't need all this space. We have children, a family. You think anyone's going to side with you." The words scraped like broken glass, echoing every dismissal I had endured. But this time, I had prepared. I lifted the deed, the bold letters of my name catching the last of the sunlight. "This says otherwise," I declared. "I am the sole owner. Your name is nowhere on this." For a moment, silence. Then a car door slammed and Hector and Dolores appeared walking slowly up the driveway. My father's eyes narrowed, his voice heavy with authority. "Monica, enough. Let them in. Stop this charade." Dolores moved to Victor, wrapping her arms around him, kissing his forehead. "It's okay, honey. Don't let your sister ruin this." The betrayal seared through me. Even now, even in public, they chose him. My throat tightened, but I didn't waver. "I'm not ruining anything. I'm protecting what is mine." Victor turned to the crowd, playing to his audience. "See? She's selfish. She's always been selfish. Dad, Mom, tell her she has no right to keep us out." I felt the weight of decades pressing down. But before the familiar suffocation could smother me, another voice rang out. Rachel Kim stepped from her car, briefcase in hand, her posture crisp with authority. She walked to the porch and set down her case with deliberate care. "Actually," she said clearly, "she has every right, and I have the documents to prove it." She opened the case, pulling out copies of the cease and desist letter, the deed, the rental agreement. "Any attempt to enter this property without permission constitutes trespassing. If you proceed, law enforcement will be called. And Victor," she added, her eyes sharp, "we also have evidence of you forging Monica's signature on trust documents 2 years ago. Would you like me to explain that in detail here, or would you prefer a courtroom?" The crowd shifted uneasily. Isabella's smile cracked and whispers raced through her relatives. A cousin muttered forgery, an aunt hissed, "You didn't tell us that." Victor's face drained of color. "That's a lie," he shouted, but Rachel remained calm. She held up a folder of photocopied checks and signatures. "This is your handwriting, Victor. Deny it all you want, but these will speak louder in front of a judge." The murmurs grew louder, fracturing the group's unity. Someone grabbed a suitcase and muttered about finding a hotel. Children began whining. Isabella's aunt scolded her for dragging them into chaos. One by one, the relatives peeled away, slipping back into the vans. Victor spun desperate. "Wait! Don't leave. She's bluffing." But no one listened. The air of triumph collapsed around him, leaving only tension and shame. He turned back to me, fury blazing. "You think this is over? You think a stack of papers makes you strong. You're nothing, Monica. You'll always be nothing." The words were familiar, rehearsed the same venom I had heard all my life. But standing there with Rachel's steady presence beside me, with Mr. Thompson quietly taking notes with the weight of the deed in my hand, I realized they no longer pierced me. They were just words. Empty. I looked him straight in the eye. "You don't get to decide that anymore." His fists clenched, but with no allies left, he had no fight. Isabella tugged his sleeve, face pale with embarrassment. "Let's just go, Victor." He hesitated, then spat at the ground. "This isn't finished." but his voice cracked thinner than it had ever sounded. One by one, the vans backed out of the driveway. The roar of engines faded into the distance. The air grew quiet, broken only by the sound of waves rolling in steady rhythm. Hector and Dolores lingered, their expressions dark with disapproval. Hector shook his head. "You've disgraced us. Blood should come before property." Dolores's voice quivered, half pleading, half scolding. "You'll regret this, Monica. Family is all you have." I held their gaze, my pulse steady. If this is family, then I'd rather have none. For a moment, silence. Then they turned walking after Victor, leaving me alone on the porch. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold. Rachel touched my arm gently. "You did it," she said. I looked out over the ocean, the air thick with salt and freedom. The beach house stood solid beneath my feet, no longer a fragile dream, but a fortress I had defended. For the first time, I wasn't the invisible daughter, the sacrificial sister. I was Monica Alvarez, owner of this home, survivor of decades of erasure, and I had stood my ground. Yet, beneath the triumph was something else, something quieter, heavier. Not joy, not victory, but the first breath of release. The battle was over, but I knew the war with my family had reached its breaking point. The night settled in, the tide crept higher, and I sat on the balcony, keys still warm in my palm, whispering to myself the words I had written in my journal days before, not this time. That night, long after the last van had rumbled out of the driveway, the house was silent again. I sat on the balcony with the sliding door cracked open, the smell of salt and damp wood drifting in. The only light came from the moon hanging low over the water, silver streaks breaking across the waves. I thought I would feel triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow, as though every word, every memory, every scream from the showdown had stripped something from me. The house was safe, but the price of keeping it was realizing what I had truly lost, the illusion of family. Rachel stayed a little while, making sure I was steady. She left me with a firm handshake and a promise to back me if Victor tried anything further. Mr. Thompson gathered his notes, assured me the rental contract was airtight, and drove away. When their taillights disappeared, I was alone in the very house I had dreamed of filling with peace. And somehow, the silence felt more comforting than any celebration. The next morning, I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table. The envelope I had written days before the letter to Hector and Dolores still sat in my bag. I pulled it out, smoothed the creases, and reread the words. "I am no longer your scapegoat or Victor's safety net. The beach house is mine. If you stand with him, you stand against me. I will not yield." For a long time, I stared at the paper. My hand hovered over my phone, tempted to soften the message, to rewrite history, to make one last plea for love. But then I remembered Dolores kissing Victor's forehead, Hector's voice booming that I had disgraced them. I remembered being told at 10 that my future was to marry well-remembered at 25, coming home to find my food eaten remembered, the scholarship money gone, the forged signature. The truth was clear. They had chosen their side a long time ago. I sealed the envelope and dropped it in the mailbox on my way to the beach. The waves were cold against my ankles, but the water steadied me. For the first time, I understood that walking away wasn't weakness, it was survival. Over the next week, Victor tried calling, texting, even leaving voicemails filled with threats. "You think this is over. You'll regret this. You'll die alone." Each message hit like a dart, but I didn't answer. I forwarded them all to Rachel, who filed them neatly in a folder labeled harassment. I blocked his number. Hector and Dolores called once. I didn't pick up. When their voicemail played, I listened only to the first sentence. "Monica, you're tearing this family apart," before deleting it. They had never seen that the tear had existed my whole life. I wasn't tearing it apart. I was walking away from ruins. Instead of drowning in grief, I poured my energy into the house. I painted one of the spare bedrooms. A soft blue added crisp linens, filled the shelves with books I loved. I set up a desk facing the ocean where I could review case files and work remotely. I planted rosemary and lavender in pots along the porch, their scents mingling with the salt air. Every brushstroke, every nail hammered into place, every pot of soil was a declaration. This is mine. I choose what grows here. Soon, the first renters arrived, a couple from Atlanta celebrating their anniversary. They brought a bottle of wine, and as I handed them the keys, I realized how good it felt to share the space by choice. not by demand. Their laughter filled the halls that weekend, and when they left, they thanked me for the peace they had found here. I stood on the balcony after they drove away, inhaling the quiet feeling lighter than I had in years. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I took the old key to my parents' house from my bag. The brass was worn smooth from decades of use, from years of me slipping in quietly after long shifts, from countless nights of locking myself into a childhood bedroom that never felt safe. I held it for a long time, then walked down to the water's edge. The waves licked at my toes, the horizon burned orange, and I hurled the key as far as I could. It hit the surface with a faint splash and vanished, my past buried by salt and tide. Standing there, tears streaking my face, I whispered, "Peace is worth more than inheritance." And I meant it. I hadn't just defended a house. I had defended myself, my future, my right to exist without being consumed. Now, when I wake in the mornings, the first thing I hear is the steady rhythm of the sea. I make coffee, open the balcony doors, and let the breeze in. Sometimes I host renters, sometimes I work alone, but always the house feels like a sanctuary. Not because it's free from conflict memories, still sting voicemails, still echo in my head, but because I chose it, because I fought for it, because I let go of everything that tried to diminish me. I don't know if I'll ever reconcile with Hector or Dolores. I don't know if Victor will ever stop his venom. But I do know this: their story no longer dictates mine. This house, this life, this peace, it's mine, and I will never surrender it again. So I ask you listening, now, have you ever had to walk away from toxic family just to find peace? Tell me where you're watching from, share your story in the comments, and if you believe in reclaiming your own worth, don't forget to like and subscribe. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't punishment, sometimes it's freedom.